I could say that I have big problems, but it would be very selfish, since there are people with problems much worse and more than mine. But one way or another, we all have one thing in common. You know what? Even after the darkest night, dawn comes. Sooner or later, something good will come, and this story is a good confirmation of this. My name is Carl Fuller, a 27-year-old tech enthusiast. For as long as I can recall, I've had a fascination with computers of all kinds. My journey with computers began around the age of 10 or 11, when I started experimenting with my first home computer. Throughout my schooling, I eagerly enrolled in every computer-related class available. My parents always supported my quest for knowledge, as did my older sister Kayla, who aspired to be a lawyer. Together, we were encouraged to explore various opportunities for learning. As I matured, I naturally developed an interest in dating. However, my experiences were somewhat limited. While I went on a few first dates in high school, second dates were rare. It became apparent that many high school girls were more interested in casual dating, which didn't bother me. However, I often found myself involved with individuals who took pleasure in flaunting their supposed upgrades from me. High school left me feeling somewhat isolated, with a growing skepticism towards romantic relationships. Following graduation, I pursued a 2-year program at a local community college, which greatly satisfied my academic interests. Yet my dating experiences from high school seemed to persist into this new chapter of my life. Though I went on some dates, few progressed beyond the initial meeting, leaving me with a sense of continuity in my romantic endeavors. I encountered a girl named Andrea Hobbs whom I initially thought was quite lovely. Surprisingly, she not only went on a second and third date with me, but also helped me lose my virginity. Describing this experience as fantastic would be an understatement. However, my perception changed when I overheard her telling her friends that I contributed to her goal of having 10 sexual encounters per month. It became apparent that she struggled to find boys who weren't aware of her willingness to engage in casual intimacy with almost anyone. This revelation significantly affected my dating life, leading me to question if I was fated to remain single indefinitely. Nonetheless, I reasoned that being single was preferable to being humiliated. Upon completing my 2-year program, I secured employment within the law enforcement community and received requests for investigative services from several law firms. I made it clear to these firms that I would not engage in any illegal activities, regardless of the financial incentives. As my client base expanded, I did manage to date a few women and was fortunate enough to engage intimately with some of them on multiple occasions. However, none of these encounters evolved into serious relationships. While some were 1 or 2 night stands, none met the criteria for a long-term commitment. I must acknowledge that the law firm where my sister was employed provided me with a steady stream of cases, allowing me to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. However, this arrangement also involved my sister attempting to set me up with various women, many of whom were recently divorced and not suitable matches for me, so I kept my distance. I was approached by a prominent land developer to conduct research on several properties he was considering purchasing. During my meeting with Neil Jefferson, the developer, I was asked to delve into the personal lives of the landowners, including details about their spouses or partners, which seemed irrelevant to the property transactions. Jefferson emitted a vibe that left me feeling uncomfortable and uneasy, slick and sleazy, with an air of arrogance that I found distasteful. After our encounter, it was clear to me that I would never engage in any business dealings with him. As my business began to thrive, I met a charming young woman named Molly Howard. After enjoying coffee together on several occasions, she agreed to go out with me. Molly, slightly older than me, was a reserved individual who coincidentally frequented the same coffee spot as I did. Our conversations flowed effortlessly. I learned that she worked as a secretary in a real estate office and shared an old house near downtown with 2 roommates. We went on a few dates, which often escalated into passionate moments, including exploring each other intimately. On our 3rd date, Molly agreed to come to my place, where we could enjoy privacy without the presence of roommates. As we embraced on my bed, shedding most of our clothing, I discovered her profound enjoyment of oral pleasure. It became apparent that she possessed considerable skill in the art of fellatio. After we had completely satisfied each other and hugged, she quietly asked if I had a condom or two. After taking a few minutes to recover, we enthusiastically engaged in passionate lovemaking, trying various poses with great success. I never doubted that my rather thick 7 inches didn't meet her needs. Molly seemed to climax almost half a dozen times, loudly expressing her pleasure at each orgasm. It seemed that our first night together was solely to indulge in intense sexual activity. Despite my love for our incredible sex, I couldn't shake the thought of whether we could thrive as a couple outside of it. Following our morning encounter, we embarked on finding answers to that question and many others. Throughout the rest of the weekend, we engaged in typical couple activities, visiting popular tourist spots and enjoying each other's company. We behaved like two individuals exploring the potential of being a couple. As weeks turned into months, our time together became increasingly enjoyable. We even began discussing the possibility of her moving in with me. Given that she was spending every weekend at my place and our bond was growing stronger, it seemed like a natural progression. When she finally moved in, she hinted that it might take some time in this new arrangement before we took our relationship to the next level. We were both aware that this signaled the potential for marriage. The one concern nagging at me was her workplace, Jefferson Properties, owned by the infamous Neil Jefferson. Did she have close dealings with him? I didn't know and initially didn't inquire. With my own work consuming much of my time, I relegated this knowledge to the back of my mind. I believed I had more pressing matters to attend to, or so I thought. Over the next 3 months, our intimacy was intense, leading me to believe this could be the relationship I had longed for. We explored every aspect of our sexuality, trying everything at least once. How else could we determine our preferences? Nearly everything we experimented with, we enjoyed. Every room, every conceivable position. We admitted to each other that everything we did was exceptional, although there were some activities we favored more than others. Living on the opposite coast from her parents, we frequently engaged in phone conversations and FaceTime sessions. It appeared that we all had a good rapport. During our initial encounter with my parents, Harold and Harriet, we engaged in extensive conversation, and it appeared that we hit it off. The next Monday, while I was at work, my mother called, expressing a sense of unease. "Your dad shares the same sentiments, Carl, but he preferred me to be the one reaching out to you. What is it specifically about her that triggers doubt in both of you?" Chalk it up to women's intuition, or perhaps mother's intuition, but there was just something off. Your dad and I both want you to know that we support whatever decision you make. A few days later, my sister Kayla phoned me, expressing a desire to talk in person, just the two of us. We met at her office, and she began by mentioning her discussion with our parents. "I'm guessing Mom filled you in on her reservations about Molly, right? And Dad, too, despite him usually liking everyone. So what's your plan now, Carl?" "At the moment, I'm uncertain, since Molly hasn't given me any cause to doubt her completely. We've briefly discussed moving forward, and we're aware of what that might entail, so I'd rather do some investigating before potentially making a big mistake." "Sounds sensible. I remember some of your dating struggles in high school and college. Just know, we all want you to find happiness, whether it's with Molly or someone else in the future." Over the next few weeks, things stayed the same. Our intimacy remained passionate, but there was little talk of progressing our relationship to the next stage. About 7 or 8 months after she moved in with me, one Friday afternoon she phoned me to say she and a few of her friends planned to grab a drink or two after work. I didn't feel concerned and enjoyed my afternoon alone at home. Around 7 o'clock, I received a text informing me she was having dinner with her friends and would be back around 9-ish. By 10 o'clock, with no sign of Molly, I used the Find My Phone app and located her phone, much to my dismay, on the top floor of the Jefferson building. This alone made my blood boil, but I decided to wait and hear her explanation when she returned. When I heard her trying to enter the house quietly, I sat in the darkened living room, eager to hear what I anticipated would be some excuse. "Molly, did you lose track of time?" I asked softly. I suppose I should have called, but I didn't want to disturb you. It's past 11:30, and you told me at 7 that you were going to dinner with the girls." We did, but I must have lost track of time. Did losing track of time lead to your phone being on the top floor of the Jefferson building? She simply slumped into the nearest chair and remained silent. Okay. I apologize deeply, Carl. I truly didn't intend for any of this to occur. Will you explain what happened? Nothing that I intended to occur. Are you suggesting you were sexually assaulted? Not exactly. Were you coerced or manipulated in some way? Kind of. Should I involve the authorities? Please, Carl, no, don't. I assure you, nothing like this will happen again. I'm going to rest now and we'll continue our conversation tomorrow. Unable to sleep, I embarked on my journey of discovery. I never saw myself as a hacker per se, but rather as a specialist in data retrieval. Think of any of the NCIS series, and you could liken me to Agent McGee in the original NCIS, or Eric and Nell in NCIS. Los Angeles, or even Ernie in NCIS, Hawaii. If there's something you want to keep hidden, chances are I can uncover it, and, if necessary, leverage it against you. So, that became my mission. After just over 15 minutes, I stumbled upon a wealth of information that the fool Jefferson believed was concealed from prying eyes. The following morning, I was already sipping my second cup of coffee when Molly finally showed up. Are you kicking me out? I haven't decided yet. Will you tell me everything, holding nothing back? About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was at the employee refrigerator when Neil came up behind me and started rubbing himself against me slowly. Even through our clothes, I could feel him getting aroused. Did you ask him to stop? No, she whispered. Did you mention you had a boyfriend you've been living with for over 8 months? Once more, she whispered. No. Did I do something to make you not even attempt to resist his advances? Or were you simply waiting to be groped? With tears forming in her eyes, she shook her head. No. I remembered the doubts my parents expressed when we first met. Did I pay attention to them? Sadly, no. I just hoped they wouldn't be smug about being right. I needed to reflect a lot because, as the saying goes, it takes two to tango. The next day, Molly began the process of moving out of my house. While I was saddened by our relationship falling apart, I was somewhat relieved that we were both handling it maturely. She acknowledged her major screw-up, but she owned up to her mistakes. I never pressed her to reveal how many times it happened, perhaps because I stumbled upon 11 such videos on Jefferson's cloud account. 11. How could I have been so oblivious? Within a fortnight of Molly finding a new place, I came across news in the financial sector that Neil Jefferson was planning to develop a shopping mall, necessitating the purchase of a significant plot of land from one of the wealthiest families in our region. I got wind of an upcoming meeting where he would present his proposal to the matriarch of that family. They were in for a surprise indeed. On the day of the presentation, I was prepared with my own pitch for the old lady. I had my strategy ready and was observing the meeting through a live feed. As Jefferson began his meticulously planned video presentation in front of Mrs. Mercer and several lawyers, along with 2 of her sons, I initiated Plan B. His intended presentation for the screen was to display his proposed mall, but instead it portrayed him seated on a sofa in his office, engaging in inappropriate behavior. As the scene unfolded, Molly Howard entered wearing revealing attire, and the situation escalated quickly. Approaching him, she knelt down and began to perform a lewd act, eliciting shock from the audience. A computer-altered voice narrated, revealing this as the typical conduct of Neil Jefferson in his business dealings. The narration even went so far as to warn potential business partners, like Mrs. Mercer's group, of the repercussions of associating with Jefferson. I intervened by terminating the presentation, informing the Mercer group that they should reconsider any future collaborations with Jefferson. Furthermore, I live-streamed the incident to Jefferson's family, exacerbating the fallout. Predictably, repercussions ensued the following day. Jefferson, aware of my profession, retaliated with a lawsuit, seeking significant compensation for alleged lost revenue. 3 weeks later, I made my initial court appearance. Court proceedings. Donald Palmer representing the complainants. Kayla Fuller-Smith representing the defense. Your Honor, We seek compensation for lost revenue caused by the distressing video shown to potential clients 3 weeks ago. Objection. The court must be presented with evidence linking my client to the alleged crime. Mr. Palmer, do you possess such evidence? Your Honor, it must have been that individual. Your Honor, I personally know numerous individuals who not only had motive but also the means to commit such an act. I move to dismiss all charges. Mr. Palmer, I'll ask once more. Do you have any evidence? No, Your Honor, not at this time. Case dismissed. With prejudice. As I glanced at Neil, he appeared to be burning with embarrassment. As we exited, I met his gaze and warned him that if he ever crossed me again, I would castrate him and force-feed him his own testicles. His expression suggested he took my threat seriously. Now all I had left to do was carry on with my affairs and attempt to push this unpleasantness out of my mind, if that was even possible. Over the following months, I fell into a routine. I dedicated myself to my job, giving it my all each day before returning home. Any items Molly didn't want had already been donated to various charities. You could say I thoroughly demollied my house. My family attempted to uplift my spirits, but I couldn't shake the feeling that any future relationships would require careful consideration. One day, while seated in a coffee shop, guess who walked in? Neil Jefferson, accompanied by his bodyguard. "What's to stop me from having my bodyguard teach you a lesson, you jerk?" he sneered. Without a word, I discreetly revealed the Glock 10 from beneath my coat and placed it on the table. "I believe this might deter him, you derogatory individual," I retorted. Both of their expressions shifted at the sight of my unexpected companion. "If you even think about it, note that the safety is off. And as for you, Mr. Bodyguard, be aware that your boss has incriminating videos of your intimate encounters. Just a friendly heads up." I remained seated, sporting a confident grin, while neither Jefferson nor his bodyguard dared to reciprocate. While my professional life offered some solace, my social life was stagnant. Despite my sister's attempts to set me up with potential partners, I couldn't bring myself to date women just for the sake of companionship. While seated in my living room or occasionally out on my patio enjoying the nice weather, I found myself listening to the lyrics of a 1960 song by the Everly Brothers, famously covered by Linda Ronstadt in 1974. "I've been cheated, been mistreated. When will I be loved? I've been pushed down, I've been pushed round. When will I be loved?" The sentiment resonated deeply with me as I indulged in a bout of self-pity. The recurring thought that plagued my mind was how we had uncovered these issues before tying the knot, and thankfully we hadn't brought children into the mix. Speaking of children, I found solace in my niece, Heather, who was just about to turn 5. There were occasions when both my sister and her husband, Chad, had to work late, and I would step in to pick Heather up from after-school daycare. One particular afternoon, as she settled into her booster seat in my car, Heather remained unusually quiet. This was a departure from her usual chatter. "Is something bothering you, Heather?" I inquired as we pulled away. "Nothing I feel like talking about, Uncle Carl," she replied solemnly. Arriving home, I ushered her inside and settled her on my couch, locking eyes with her as I inquired once more if something troubled her. "All right, so there's this little boy at my daycare, a year younger than me, who always seems down. I try to talk to him, but he's incredibly shy. And then? Today, I noticed he had a bruise, or maybe 2, on one arm. Did anyone at the daycare notice and report these bruises? Yes, they took a photo and informed the police. What's the boy's name? Carl, spelled with a C, Nelson. Let's grab a snack and wait for your mom to come pick you up. Sound good? Deal, Uncle Carl. As my niece switched on the TV, I began my investigation to learn more about Carl and his family. After several attempts, here's what I uncovered. Carl Nelson lived with his father, Ed, and stepmother, Gina. There was no mention of his birth mother. Additionally, I found records showing that Ed Nelson had a previous domestic abuse charge against a woman named Cheryl Hendricks around 4 years ago. Further digging revealed that a Cheryl Hendricks had been incarcerated for drug possession during her youth, around the time Carl was born. Should I ignore this? Perhaps. But I opted to monitor the situation involving my niece and sister. Periodically, I'd inquire about the boy's well-being from Heather. She'd update me that he no longer had any bruises, yet he always appeared melancholic. I had nearly dismissed the entire incident from my mind when, a few weeks later, while picking up my niece, I heard a loud commotion across the street. Upon investigation, I witnessed a young boy cowering as a man raised his arm threateningly, as though about to strike. Approaching the scene, I warned, "Lower your fist if you wish to avoid legal repercussions." In response, the man retorted, "Stay out of my affairs or face the consequences." As I dialed the authorities and approached the man, I noticed a welt forming on the child's cheek, while a woman berated me to mind my own business. "If you lay a hand on him again, you'll be arrested. Clear?" I asserted firmly. Judging by the expressions of both parents, they understood the seriousness of my words. The frightened child approached me, tearfully confessing that his father had hit him. Examining his arms, I noticed several marks along with the bruise on his cheek. I positioned myself between the two adults and their vehicle as I heard the sound of a siren approaching. "You should stop interfering where you don't belong, jerk." "So, I'm the jerk for pointing out you're mistreating this child." When the two police officers emerged from their patrol car, one of them restrained both adults with handcuffs, while the other listened to my account and called for an ambulance to attend to the child. Once the parents were taken away and the child was transported to the local hospital, I gathered my niece and headed home. "See, Uncle Carl, that's my friend Carl and his awful parents, just like I told you." Even at the age of 5, my niece was keenly observant and didn't hold back her words. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a courtroom summoned to testify against Ed and Gina Nelson on charges of child abuse. After giving my testimony, I leaned back in my seat only to have a very young-looking girl sit beside me. She had a tough demeanor, adorned with several poorly executed tattoos and a perpetual scowl. "May I ask why you're so invested in this case?" "My niece got me interested, and besides, no child deserves what that little boy is enduring. Can I ask who you are?" "I'm his mother, Cheryl." "If I may, how old are you?" "I just turned 19 last month." After processing this information, I reached the conclusion that she became a mother at a very young age. "May I inquire why Ed Nelson wasn't prosecuted and incarcerated? And please spare me the notion of it being consensual, because at that age, one cannot provide valid consent. Please refrain from asking questions if you're not prepared for candid answers. I value your intentions, but I've navigated through numerous mistakes in life without parental guidance." By the time our conversation concluded, she was in tears, her voice barely audible. When I placed my hand on her shoulder, she appeared to recoil. I swiftly apologized and withdrew my hand, prompting me to reassess my involvement, questioning if I truly played a role in this tumult. I discovered that little Carl had been placed in foster care, with his biological mother granted unrestricted visitation rights, while she attempted to regain full custody. I assured her that she could reach out to me whenever she needed someone to talk to. I also learned that Cheryl was employed as a courtesy clerk at a nearby grocery store, demonstrating that despite her petite stature and slight build, she was capable of handling demanding work. She appeared to possess a resilience that belied her appearance. In the following months, we maintained communication. Cheryl sought my advice on various matters, ranging from securing permanent custody of her son to inquiring about my lack of dating history. I provided her with a condensed version of my involvement with Molly Howard. Her reaction suggested she was taken aback. "So, you're the one who hacked into some corporate video system and caught the boss with his secretary?" "That's correct. Where did you hear that term?" Her face flushed crimson, indicating she regretted her choice of words. We continued to meet, discussing her goals and aspirations. I was aware she was preparing for her GED, and I offered her any assistance she required. Occasionally, I treated them both to meals, which they appreciated given their financial constraints. One afternoon, following a delightful lunch as I prepared to drive them back to their rented accommodation, I observed Carl appearing rather melancholic. "What's the matter, Carl?" "Nothing, I suppose." He nestled into his mother's lap and murmured something in her ear. I observed a shocked expression on Cheryl's face and a smile on Carl's. "Care to enlighten us, either of you?" Cheryl remained silent, but Carl's query prompted some speculation on my part. "Carl, why can't we spend the night here?" I was taken aback by the question. I paused, considering. We had always gotten along well. I had never harbored any romantic thoughts about her, given her past. "Cheryl, what's your take on this? You know I have enough space." "Carl, I want to clarify that I never suggested anything like this. I just want to go home, that's all." I approached where they were seated, taking Cheryl's hands in mine. Spotting a small shirt, probably left behind by Molly, I offered it for Cheryl to wear as they headed to a spare bedroom adjacent to mine. Returning, I settled beside Cheryl, proposing to sleep on the couch. But before I could finish, she covered my mouth with her hand. "Don't even think about sacrificing your bed for me. I'll sleep here, and trust me, I've slept in far worse conditions." I fetched one of my old t-shirts for her, ensuring it provided enough coverage. When she was changing, I spread a sheet and a blanket on the couch for her, but she asked me to sit and talk for a while. When she returned, I noticed that her physique was very small, with minimal development of breasts and hips, but a well-defined ass. I want to clarify a few things before there are any misunderstandings. First of all, I would never do anything that could jeopardize our relationship. Secondly, I have just received my 1-year sobriety chip, which is perhaps my most precious possession, apart from my son. After pausing for a few breaths and allowing her to rest her head on my shoulder, I encouraged her to take her time before continuing whenever she felt ready. After a while, I noticed she had drifted off to sleep. Gently, I lifted her and placed her on my bed, positioning her as far away from me as possible. As a precaution, I placed a nightlight in the bathroom. It didn't take me long to fall asleep either. At some point during the night, I heard her softly crying, clutching her pillow for comfort. "Don't worry, Cheryl. I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." "Thank you so much. And I need to finish what I was saying earlier before I fell asleep. Regardless of where things go, I can't have any more children." I could feel her genuine tears, so I held her close, offering comfort. If there's a chance for us, nothing in this world can prevent us from becoming parents again. So let go of those worries. As I held her, she tightened her embrace around me, seeking solace. I looked at her petite figure, gently lifted her chin with one hand and kissed her gently on the lips. A lovely smile lit up her face, and I wiped away a few tears before we kissed again. We lay there, periodically exchanging kisses, and emboldened, I began to take off her t-shirt. "There's not much to look at here. I just hope you won't be disappointed," she whispered. "Nothing underneath could disappoint me, so let's just go with the flow." Taking off her shirt in the semi-darkness of my room, I began to slowly kiss her lips, then moved on to her chin and on each shoulder. As I went down to her neck, I noticed that her breathing was getting faster. When I bumped into her chest, she gasped sharply. Her body trembled. We seamlessly transitioned into closeness, a sensation I thoroughly enjoyed. Although it didn't endure as long as I desired, the sensation of release deep within her left me feeling fantastic. I embraced her quivering body tightly against mine for a solid 2 or 3 minutes. "Oh my God, Carl. I've never experienced anything like this before. Never. Please assure me that I'm not dreaming, because I want to feel this good all the time." Turning onto my back, I softly assured her that it wasn't a dream and that I found pleasure in giving her such delight. After tidying up, we simply lay in each other's embrace, her head nestled against my neck. "Carl, I need you to understand that I've had a rough history with relationships, and I still have much to learn about how to make things work between us. Just so you know, darling, I'm no expert in relationships either, so let's figure it out together. Is that okay?" Oh my God, it just felt right. I had to push aside any notion of taking advantage of this vulnerable young woman. Do we both fall into the category of people seeking happiness? Perhaps, but maybe it's worth the journey. In the morning, we gathered for breakfast, much like any ordinary family would. Could our unconventional group prove to function as a family? Only time would tell. The first thing I noticed was Cheryl's newfound spring in her step. Was it a result of her newfound sense of self-worth? Most likely. As we discussed plans for Cheryl and Carl to move in with me, fate intervened. Cheryl's employer, the grocery store where she had worked for over a year, transferred her to another branch just up the street from my house, conveniently close for her to walk to work. Building our family dynamic required considerable effort. None of us were accustomed to living together as a family, so it took some adjustment. We also had to learn to be more discreet with our intimate activities, mindful of the presence of a 4-year-old in the house. We explored virtually every corner of the house and experimented with every imaginable position in the bedroom. However, Carl's room remained strictly off-limits from the start. One thing that was unequivocally off the table was any involvement with Cheryl's past. I knew immediately that was a boundary we would never cross. I soon realized that my beloved had an almost unquenchable appetite for affection. It seemed to be the first time in her brief life that she was loved simply for being herself. We had a myriad of ways to delight each other. On the home front, our family bond grew stronger, though not necessarily in the bedroom. I took on the task of assisting Carl with his reading and writing to give him a head start before starting elementary school in the fall. Meanwhile, she helped Cheryl enroll in extra classes at a nearby college. We enjoyed several dinners with my parents, my sister, and her family. With each gathering, my family embraced my girlfriend and her son more warmly. Following a particular dinner where my father and I were alone, he quietly broached the topic of marriage with me. When I mentioned that we had briefly discussed it, he inquired about our inclinations. Dad, initially she was hesitant, given her past, but I believe we're both warming up to the idea. And you know I was a bit cautious considering my last dating debacle. I understand, son, but sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. On our way back home, as we tucked Carl into bed, we delved into that conversation in earnest. Cheryl, would you like to marry me? I really think I do, but I need some time to work through my doubts. How much time do you think you'll need? About 2 or 3 minutes tops, she said with a wide grin. And one more thing, Carl. Do you think it's possible for me to call your parents Mom and Dad? Why don't you ask them yourself? I dialed their number and handed her my phone. As Cheryl posed the question to them, I could discern from her smile and the tears in their eyes what their response would be. Now, all that was left to do was plan a wedding. The following morning, when we shared the news with Carl, he couldn't contain his grin either. He even requested if he could phone Heather, his closest friend, and share the news with her. Over the next few weeks, when we weren't occupied with work, we spent our time in bed, engaging in passionate intimacy. One particular night, after thoroughly exhausting ourselves, I held her close from behind, my arm draped over her shoulder. Suddenly, my arousal took control once more as it pressed against her shapely rear. The following morning, when we shared the news with Carl, he couldn't contain his grin either. He even requested if he could phone Heather, his closest friend, and share the news with her. Over the next few weeks, when we weren't occupied with work, we spent our time in bed engaging in passionate intimacy. One particular night, after thoroughly exhausting ourselves, I held her close from behind, my arm draped over her shoulder. Suddenly, my arousal took control once more as it pressed against her shapely rear. We've done the same thing. And in the morning again. As our wedding drew nearer, Cheryl couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness knowing that we'd have very few family members present. You'll just have to consider everyone there as your family from now on, I reassured her. With my parents, sister, brother-in-law, and our close friends Heather and Carl making up our bridal party, everything felt complete. Our wedding day was truly perfect. My father walked Cheryl down the aisle, then stood proudly beside me as my best man. Nearly a month later, 2 detectives from the county arrived at my office with grim news. Neil Jefferson had been found dead in a secluded alley, brutally beaten. Shockingly, it was revealed that he had been violated with a thick, nearly 10-inch dildo. Furthermore, his former bodyguard was nowhere to be found. Inwardly, I harbored the hope that he would remain elusive forever. Approaching our 6-month anniversary, my sister contacted us to inform that the police had rescued a newborn baby left in front of one of their precincts. Upon examination by doctors, she was found to be a relatively healthy 2 or 3-day-old infant wrapped in a warm blanket, with a note attached to her clothes pleading, "Please find me a good home." Cheryl and I exchanged glances, both expressing our desire to see the baby and discuss our options. The following day, we were able to visit the little girl, while the police informed us of their efforts to locate the birth mother or any family members. We understood that it would be several weeks before any decisions could be made. It required all our strength to resist picking up the baby, knowing that if we did and couldn't keep her, it would be heartbreaking. Patience was our only choice. I want you to know, Carl, I'm trying my hardest not to get too attached, but I really hope we can offer that precious baby a loving home. I understand completely, which is why I refrained from picking her up as well. We must wait and see. The next 2 weeks felt like an eternity, until we finally received a call from the police we had spoken with, informing us that the baby was available for fostering with the potential for adoption in the future. We couldn't reach the hospital quickly enough. The nursing staff who was looking after her informed us that she had captured everyone's hearts, and if we weren't interested in adopting her, there was a waiting list of people eager for the opportunity. All we needed to do was initiate the paperwork. However, we needed to give her a name, as she was currently referred to as Jane, like Jane Doe. Throughout the wait, I refrained from thinking of a name, fearing it might bring bad luck and disappointment. Conversely, my wife suggested Denise. I remembered Cheryl, who had been supported by a woman with that name for the past 2 years, aiding her in achieving sobriety and boosting her self-esteem. It was Denise Joy Fuller who arrived. Our cozy pink nursery was already prepared, and we had warned Carl about the impending noise entering his world. He shrugged it off, insisting that having a little sister would be worth it. I was amazed at how naturally my wife took to motherhood and how swiftly we all adapted to the presence of this noisy newcomer. Denise had a way of winning over everyone she met. Would we go through it all again if given the chance? Probably not. We were content with the family we had. Were we a perfect family? Far from it. But we made the most of every opportunity that came our way. I flourished in my career. Cheryl, against all odds, became an exceptional wife and mother. Both our children were provided with every opportunity to succeed, and they did. Cheryl and I faced our own challenges, finding joy in each other's company, and forging an unlikely but successful partnership, proving that opposites can indeed thrive together.
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!